and welcome to another episode of Garage Game Day Sports. I am your host, as always, Louis Longoria. I want to dive in and talk about my college football playoff rankings. The college football playoff rankings will be released for the first time tonight. I will give you my top four, where I think teams will land, and where I think the committee is going to spot some teams. So I want to go ahead and jump right on in. Let's start with the obvious, number one. I think everybody and their mother's got Georgia, number one. The Bulldogs, very impressive. Regardless if it's Stetson Bennett or JT Daniels under center, that run game is just phenomenal. That defense, just smothering teams, averaging less than 7 points per game they're allowing. That Bulldog defense is for real. And any teams they come across, they shut down. Completely shut out Arkansas. They shut down Kentucky. They shut down Florida behind a huge second half this last week. In the first half, it was 3-0. Tacked on 3 quick touchdowns right at halftime and put that game to bed early as well. I really like what the Bulldogs are doing. They're the class, not just of the SEC, but the class they're their own class in the college football playoff rankings and in the standings right now as far as where they stand and the chances they have of hoisting that national title trophy at the end of the season. So Georgia, even with a stumble down the road, as long as they make it to Atlanta for the SEC championship game unscathed, I think they can, well, of course, either beat Alabama and be number one outright, or they could even lose. And as long as they don't get run out of the field by some weird chance, they lose by 14 points or fewer, I think they'd still be all right. As long as they don't get run off the field in the SEC title game, Georgia will be a lock to make the playoff. Even as a one-loss non-con champ, they'll still get it done. So I have faith in the Bulldogs. They'll be the clear number one tonight. They're clear number one ranked team in everybody's rankings right now. And until they get beat, that's where they got to stay. My number two team, this is where it really gets interesting. I got to sit up straight for this. My number two team, I've got Michigan State. This is live TV, folks. I've got Michigan State, my number two ranked team. I'll tell you why. They beat Michigan. I think out of the trio of Michigan State, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma, Michigan State has the best win. Cincinnati has the Notre Dame win right now. Michigan State has the Michigan win, and Oklahoma doesn't really have a huge win. Their best win so far is over a 4-4 Texas team, or a blowout win over TCU, or you kind of pick one. But as far as that trio, regardless what game you pick, they're gonna have the third best quality win out of that trio. I've got Michigan State because I've got Michigan ranked ahead of Notre Dame in the rankings. I think they'll hold Michigan in high regard because of their schedule, who they're still yet to play, and also the fact that Notre Dame struggled out of the gate. Their first month or so, they struggled with Florida State, struggled with Toledo and some other teams. So by way of that, kind of a transitive property there, I had to go down a rabbit hole a little bit, but I think Michigan State's the second best team. You've got Kenneth Walker, Peyton Thorne. I know Thorne struggled a bit in this game, but he had some pretty good numbers up until that point. And Kenneth Walker just locked up his trip to his Heisman Trophy presentation trip, man. 5 touchdowns against Michigan, all of them on the ground. Kid can just go. And Michigan State, they still got to play Ohio State, still got to play Penn State. So I've got the Spartans at number 2 right now. And number 3, speaking of those quality wins, I was just talking about Oklahoma, Cincinnati. I've got the Bearcats at number 3. And I know that's probably not going to fly with the committee because the committee is going to nitpick like they always do and break down Cincinnati and their shortcomings or their lack of resume wins, even though they beat Notre Dame and they had a good win over Indiana at the time. That loss is kind of diminished over time. But they shut down Notre Dame. They held them to 13 points. Notre Dame's a top 10 team. Where they're going to fall in the top 10 is yet to be determined. But I just like the Bearcats. That defense is still legit. You still got Desmond Ridder. You still got Jerome Ford. They've got a lot of weapons. I just think they can pose problems for teams. I've got them at number 3 right now, and it's yet to be seen. The SMU loss, I thought hurt them, but SMU is still ranked, and Houston moved into the top 25. So, by virtue of that, their resume going forward is not going to be quite as weak as other people think. You have the Notre Dame win, which is a top 10 win, at least right now. You've got SMU in 2 or 3 weeks. If they get by them, they'll probably get Houston in the AAC title game. And if they win that, they'd be an undefeated Power 5 champ, but 3 top 25 wins under their belt. So as long as SMU and Houston, they're favored to keep winning, which they are. You'd have 3 top 25 wins, one of them being a top 10 win. I just like the Bearcats there at number 3. And number 4, I've got Oklahoma. The lack of wins, the lack of quality wins, that's not there right now. They're on bye this week. They've got Iowa State, Baylor, and Oklahoma State to close the season. So they're going to have the resume later on, especially if they run through that gauntlet, even if they pick up a loss along the way. If they get one loss, they reach the Big 12 title game, and they win that, they'll be a 12-1, I believe, a 12-1 Big 12 conference champ. That would be enough to get them in my book. So I think even with one loss, they'll be fine. I know the switch from Spencer Rattler to Caleb Williams, that did wonders for that offense, but they still struggled at times. They put up a goose egg in the first half against Kansas. So it's tough to explain that. If you're going to nitpick Cincinnati, you've got to nitpick Oklahoma. That's why I have Oklahoma behind Cincinnati. And I'm not sure that's going to fly with the committee. But going back to Cincinnati real quick, if you're going to nitpick the Bearcats for struggling against Tulane for a half, hell, Oklahoma struggled with them the whole game. They gave up 35 to Tulane. They only beat Nebraska by a touchdown. They had to come back against a 4-loss Texas team. They had a close one against West Virginia, and then they were down 10 at halftime to Kansas of all teams. So if you're going to nitpick Cincinnati, you've got to nitpick Oklahoma because they do not look that great right now. They'll have the resume later, and you do like the shiny and spotless 8-0 record, or 7-0 record, excuse me. But 9-0 actually. So you do have to respect that. Respect the fact that they're an undefeated Power 5 team, and I'm interested to see where Wake Forest is going to fall in all this. But that's a story for another day. So my top 4. To recap, Georgia 1, Michigan State 2, Cincinnati 3, Oklahoma 4. I'll dive in real quick. My next 2 out. Number 5, I'm going to have to go Alabama. And they've got Auburn still on the schedule. They had the loss to A&M, and although they were unranked at the time, A&M's looking better. A&M had that loss to Mississippi State, so if you're kind of looking down the line, they lost to Mississippi State, and then Alabama lost to A&M. But Bama's got some work to do, but they can get there. They're the favorites in the SEC West to get to Atlanta. And if they get Georgia in the SEC title game, that's going to be a nightmare scenario for someone like Cincinnati, where if Alabama were to run the table, win the SEC, what do you do with Georgia? And unfortunately, the committee may very well look at that and say that Georgia and Bama both deserve to be there and screw Cincinnati because we don't like the little guy. We've proven over time that we don't like the little guys and that their resumes aren't quality enough and, all that. I can go on and on. But Alabama, I've got number 5. You've got to respect the offense. You got to respect the defense. Nick Saban, is there. He's always going to be a factor in the SEC. And, what they did against Ole Miss, that's a huge win still over Ole Miss. That game was over before halftime. So they have a loss, but it's somewhat of a quality loss, and it's actually looking better the way A&M's playing, and we'll see how they do against Auburn this weekend. At number 6, it's a toss-up to me between Oregon and Ohio State, but I think I'm going to go Oregon right now because of the head-to-head. The head-to-head right now should matter. If both win out, I could see easily Ohio State jumping Oregon because Oregon has the worst loss than Ohio State, even though Ohio State lost to Oregon. But Ohio State would have the better resume. Ohio State still has to play Michigan. They still have to play Michigan State. And, they have the Big Ten title game, which is not exactly world beaters on the other division of the Big Ten. But they would have that feather in their cap in the sense that they have a Big Ten championship. And to me, a Big Ten championship would easily trump a Pac-12 championship at this point. So I've got Oregon number 6, but it wouldn't surprise me if Ohio State moves up. The better quality wins they rack up, they'll move into the top 4. So if you're a Buckeye fan and you're outside the top 4 right now, I wouldn't really sweat it because you'll have the resume later to make up for it. How I think the committee is going to seed this is interesting. Of course, everybody's going to have Georgia number 1. They're the clear-cut favorite. No drama there. Georgia 1. I'm not sure if they'll have Michigan State or Oklahoma 2. I think they'll have Michigan State 2. And it wouldn't surprise me in the least if they had Alabama 3, just because they're Alabama and they had the one loss and the A&M loss is looking better and better. So what I'm projecting the College Football Playoff Committee to do is have Georgia 1, Michigan State 2, Alabama 3, Oklahoma 4, and then I think they put Cincinnati at 5. The reason they'll have them outside the top 4, is because it's going to be hard to justify keeping Cincinnati in the top 4 and then shuffling them down if they finish the season undefeated. If they run the table in the AAC, they'll have the Notre Dame win, then they'd have the SMU win and the Houston win. The committee would have a hard time still justifying how you leave out a 13-0 conference champ, albeit a Power 5 conference, but a conference champ nonetheless with 3 top 25 wins. I think they have to start them at 5. If I'm the committee, they're definitely starting them at 5. I don't agree with that at all. I think they should be number 3. This goes back to last year. Hell, they've been undefeated for 2 seasons, and their only loss happens to be to the number 1 team sitting in the polls right now, and is going to be the number 1 until the SEC championship game, or they may just go wire to wire and be number 1 the rest of the year. That's the only loss the Bearcats have had the last 2 seasons. I think you have to respect that. You have to respect their schedule, the talent that they have, the coaching that they have. So I would have Cincinnati 3, but I figure the committee will have them at 5. So to recap, I've got Georgia 1, Michigan State 2, Cincinnati 3, Oklahoma 4, Alabama 5. What I think the committee will do is have Georgia 1, Michigan State 2, Alabama 3, Oklahoma 4, Cincinnati 5. And it's interesting to also see how the whole Wake Forest thing plays out. In the ACC, if they go undefeated, that's another thing to account for. And will it be a battle between Wake Forest and Cincinnati, or we're gonna have an old the old Boise State TCU nightmare from a few years ago where they finished undefeated, then they went ahead and pitted them against each other. So it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. There's plenty of huge games going on the rest of the year that'll help shape the top 10 and the top 25 of the college football playoff rankings. Those are my rankings. I'll try and be back later this week for some more input and my reaction to how the college football playoff committee is going to shape out this top 5, top 10, top 25. My name is Louis Longoria. This is Garage Game Day Sports. Thank you all for listening. I will see you guys next time.